Let's contrast the American philosophy of individual rights and the globalist philosophy of community rights. In America, the nature of our rights are those that belong to the individual. This is predicated upon the principles set forth in the Declaration of Independence. The purpose of government, under our system of government, is to protect the natural or unalienable rights of the individual. That all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Whereas the rights that exist under the UN Declaration of Human Rights are community rights. The purpose of government is to control the individual for the greater good of a global community. In Article 29, Section C of that document, it says, quote, "Rights and freedoms may be in no case exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations." Totally different foundation and a totally different nature of rights. You see, under the UN Declaration of Human Rights, I call them animal rights, it's all the same thing. Government grants, restricts, or withdraws your rights according to its needs. You and the product of your labor belong to the community. In America, our tradition holds that you're born with rights and that government exists to protect those rights. You and the product of your labor belong to you. Now, the judicial system that protects individual rights is based upon a principle of freedom called equal justice. Equal justice supports true diversity, a respect for the independence and unalienable rights of the individual, and genuine tolerance for individuality. Equal justice puts a checkmate on mob rule. But a system of human rights, called animal rights, or community rights, operates within the pursuit of the system of social justice, which can be defined as law formulated to obtain government social objectives at the expense of individual liberty. The Sustainable Development Agenda is based upon the principle that the collective good is more important than individual rights. This is in direct opposition to the principles set forth in the Declaration of Independence. Now, there are three broad principles that underlie Agenda 21. The first is the step-by-step program for the abolition of private property. The second is education for global citizenship. Do you think the notion of unalienable rights is presented in today's schools? Take notice of the number of young sustainablers, many of whom identify themselves as global citizens. Universities are building a fifth column for sustainability, an army of young college graduates. For even younger people, there are the policies and assessments, not the testing, but the assessments of No Child Left Behind. All of this is geared to neuter the next generation's understanding of liberty and of the American experience and experiment. The third driving principle of Agenda 21 is control over human action. For instance, we see technological advances used by government to monitor the individual. We see this happening through federal legislation that would direct biometric identification of you included on your driver's license. That means that if you walk through an entryway and there's a biometric reader there, they know everything about you. It's intended to be used for marketing purposes as well as for control purposes. We now see the advent of cameras everywhere and of government-accessible databases that have everything about you that you now think It's private. Think of what could have been accomplished if the time, energy, and brains to put together this big brother infrastructure had instead been used to teach each person how to recognize the unalienable rights of all. And think of the debt we could have avoided. I will focus my comments on the effort to abolish private property concerning land. But first, we've got to ask and answer, what is private property? Private property begins with your person. My hand is my private property. It includes your thoughts. Your thoughts are your private property. And it also includes your relationship to something. And by relationship, I mean the power to use and enjoy that thing. Private property itself is not the thing. It's the relationship a person has to something. Private property can only exist where unalienable rights are recognized. Remember, all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. America is the only place, only if for a brief shining moment, where unalienable rights have been politically recognized. Today, they are politically ignored. As America implements Agenda 21's two land use programs, called Smart Growth and the Wildlands Network, recognition of unalienable rights is obliterated. Let me explain these programs with the help of this map. Let's start by defining terms. Wildlands means the removal of people and the prohibition of resource extraction. These areas are indicated on this map in red. Yellow areas are buffers to the wildlands where public-private partners will engage in limited and controlled activities. Smart growth is the stacking and packing of human beings in dense cities where people will depend on public transportation rather than automobility. In the words of a smart growth advocate, quote, "It will be the people in cages with the animals roaming freely." Smart growth areas, also referred to by the UN as human settlements, are demonstrated by the black dots, primarily located on the two coasts. I'm now going to talk about the North American Union and the Trans-Texas Corridor. The Trans-Texas Corridor is a major component in the creation of the North American Union. The corridor facilitates the political and economic equalization of Mexico, Canada, and the United States. They do this through the establishment of trade routes, toll roads, utility lines, and inland ports. These systems are to be developed, managed, and owned by various multinational corporations working in public-private partnership with governments. This map was produced by the North America's Super Corridor Coalition. And you can find it at their website. Now, in order to meet the global equalization objectives of the economic E, the Sustainable Development System requires global management of trade directed by the World Trade Organization, pursuant to policy created by the World Bank. The system of managed trade necessitates bringing down American production and middle-class standards of living down to a world standard. Similar to the European Union, the North American Union calls for an eventual merger of countries, in this case Canada, US, and Mexico. By design, this leads to regional governance that sacrifices our unalienable rights and our national security.